Two-time WHA MVP and Montreal Canadiens Stanley Cup winner Marc Tardif is the forgotten star of the 1970s. The WHA's all-time leading goal scorer and an NHL All Star, Tardif's magnificent career is certified Hall of Fame worthy. But Tardif's career nearly came to a premature end in 1976 after a violent and senseless attack left him bloodied and severely injured. Eventually, Tardif battled back from the physical pain, managed his emotional trauma, and would go on to realize his greatest career achievements. When his playing days ended, the Quebec Nordiques retired his number 8, and he did enjoy great success off the ice. But the nightmares of that horrifying night in 1976 persisted. In order to erase those haunting memories and achieve true peace of mind, Marc Tardif would need to come face to face with the man who nearly ruined his life. Marc Tardif's rise to stardom began in junior hockey as a member of the Montreal Junior Canadiens. The 1968-69 edition of the Junior Canadiens is regarded as one of the greatest junior teams ever assembled. Among the future NHL stars in that group were Tardif, Gilbert Perreault, Richard Martin, Réjean Houle, Guy Chiron, and Jocelyn Gavemont. Not surprisingly, that powerful team captured the Memorial Cup as the top junior team in Canada in 1969. Marc was drafted second overall by the Montreal Canadiens in 1969 thanks to an obsolete draft rule that gave the Habs the right to select 2 French-Canadian players of their choosing before the rest of the league's amateur draft was held. Tardif began the 1969-70 season playing for Montreal's farm team, the Montreal Voyageurs of the AHL, where he racked up 58 points in only 45 games before getting called up to the big club in February 1970. However, playing time would be tough to come by for Tardif, as the Habs lineup featured future Hall of Famers such as Jean Beliveau, Frank Mahovlich, Andre Richard, Jacques Lemaire, and Yvan Cournoyer. Still, he went on to play regular shifts with the Canadiens for the following 3 seasons, scoring 19, 25, and 31 goals, often playing on the third line. The talented left wing also earned a reputation as a tough player, who was not afraid to fight if necessary, as evidenced by the 133 penalty minutes he compiled in 1970-71. Tardif earned 2 Stanley Cups in 71 and 73, but he often feuded with Habs coach Scotty Bowman, who questioned his commitment to the defensive end of the ice. In 1973, Marc was offered a 3-year, $250,000 contract by the Los Angeles Sharks of the rival WHA. He had been making $40,000 with the Habs, who then offered him $80,000 but on a 1-year deal. Tardif jumped at the Sharks' offer and was to be the centerpiece of the LA franchise. Tardif's money was guaranteed by the league, but his play was uninspired with the Sharks, a terrible franchise with inadequate practice facilities and sparse fan support. He failed to score in his first 10 games, but ended the lackluster 73-74 season with 70 points, including 40 goals. In April 1974, LA moved its team to Michigan and was named the Michigan Stags. The cash-starved franchise was even worse in Michigan, and in January they were forced to deal Tardif and his hefty contract to the Quebec Nordiques in exchange for journeyman Pierre Guité, Alain Boom Boom Caron, and Michel Rollo. Reunited with his best friend Réjean Houle and placed on a line with Chris Bordelot and budding superstar Real Buddy Cloutier, Tardif immediately flourished in his native Quebec with 38 goals in just 53 games to end the season with 50 goals between the two teams. The Nordiques were so elated to have Tardif in the fold, they gave him an unheard-of 10-year contract. A wise business decision, as Nordiques' attendance jumped by over 3,000 per game upon his arrival. Entering the 1975-76 campaign, the peak of the 1970s Goon era, Nordiques GM Maurice Filion realized he needed a crew of heavyweights to protect his investment in Tardif and Quebec's Flying Frenchmen. So he fortified his lineup with feared policemen such as Gordy Machine Gun Gallant, Kurt Brackenberry, Steve Sutherland, Alan Glebensky, and Charles Constantin. Everything went according to plan throughout the 75-76 season. The Nordiques led the league in goals and finished first in the Canadian division. Meanwhile, Tardif established himself as the WHA's premier player, pacing the league in goals with 71, assists with 77, and points with 148. And he was named the league's MVP. Tardif was invited to play in the 1976 Canada Cup and was considered to be the premier left wing in all of hockey. The one team Tardif struggled with during his magical season was the Calgary Cowboys, a grinding team with few stars. Offensively, Tardif was a non-factor in the season series versus the Cowboys, but he did fight notorious goon Rick Jodzio twice and delivered a severe beating to tough guy Butch Deadmarsh. Throughout the season, Jodzio was given strict orders to shadow and distract Tardif, and the strategy appeared to be effective. To set the scene for what transpired next, we refer to 2004's The Rebel League. The high-flying Nordiques met the Cowboys in the first round of the playoffs that season in what looked like, on paper, to be a monumental mismatch. The Cowboys finished 18 points behind the Nordiques in the regular season standings. The series was supposed to be a walkover for the Nordiques. Cowboys coach Joe Crozier decided the series needed some publicity. So before the first game, he took Cowboys henchmen Jodzio, Deadmarsh, and Peter Driscoll to a boxing club and had pictures taken of them sparring. They then upset the Nordiques 3-1 in the first game of the series before all hell broke loose in Game 2. Early in the contest, Gordie Gallant jumped Jodzio, and both players were given 5-minute majors. Tardif scored while Jodzio was serving his penalty. Later in the first period, Tardif had positioned himself along the boards in his zone when Jodzio came off the Calgary bench and made a beeline towards the Nordique star. According to Quebec goalie Richard Brodeur, who was playing goal that night, Jodzio got within 10 feet of Tardif, launched himself, and cross-checked the Nordiques winger in the face. Tardif, who was not wearing a helmet, fell backwards. His skull hit the ice with a sickening thud, and he was immediately knocked unconscious. Still, the bloodthirsty Jodzio proceeded to pummel the defenseless Tardif with several punches as blood gushed from his nose and mouth. Jodzio had one thing on his mind, says Brodeur. When he jumped on Marc, I jumped on him. Then someone jumped on me, and the riot started. The ensuing brawl lasted for 45 minutes and ended only when Quebec police appeared on the ice and escorted both teams to the dressing rooms. 11 players were ejected. Referee Steve Dowling issued 179 penalty minutes. Bloodied, battered, and still unconscious, Tardif was taken off the ice on a stretcher and rushed to a nearby hospital. It was the worst thing I've ever seen in hockey, said Maurice Villion. The incident gained worldwide attention. The aftermath of the brawl wasn't much better. The Cowboys, who would win the series, immediately accused the Nordiques of exaggerating their star's injury. Jodzio denied he cross-checked Tardif. Crozier blamed Quebec coach Jean-Guy Gendron for failing to control his team. The Nordiques, for their part, threatened to withdraw from the series unless Jodzio was suspended for life. Crozier was suspended for the rest of the series, and WHA Vice President of Operations Bud Poyle resigned. Given the geopolitics involved with the two teams, the coverage of the incident took on a shrill, bigoted tone. Doctors determined that Tardif suffered a major brain trauma and was one of the first acknowledged victims of a serious concussion. He didn't skate for the next 4 months, and he only resumed training at the end of the following summer. He was forced to miss the 1976 Canada Cup tournament. Meanwhile, Jodzio faced criminal charges and pleaded guilty to assault. Here's how the CBC covered the Calgary-Quebec brawl.
The Solicitor General's office says the demand to lay criminal charges will get special attention. The two teams cleared the benches to fight after Tardif was flattened by a high stick and punched several times while he lay helpless on the ice. The president of the Nordiques, John Dakers, describes the case as butchery and blames the Cowboys coach, Joe Crozier. Tardif, who set a WHA scoring record this season with 71 goals and 77 assists, was taken to hospital unconscious as the fight continued. The team says he'll be out of action for the rest of the playoffs against the Cowboys. Police had to intervene to restore order after almost an hour of fighting. The Cowboys went on to win 8-4 to take a 2-0 lead in the best-of-7 semifinals of the WHA's Canadian division. David Bazet, CBC News, Quebec City.
Tardif says he was never the same player after Jodzio's attack.
It's been really tough for my family and for myself and for my friends. So it's for sure I'll never forget what happened. And even today, I still feel some troubles with that. But
are you talking more, Marc, that the mental anguish is still there because physically you're fine?
Yeah, physically I'm fine. But the thing is that when you get hurt like that, you just can't. You're not maybe as strong as you were before, and I heard that about Ted Green when he was hurt in 72, 73, if I can remember. You know, you don't feel the same, and sometimes after you have maybe 1 or 2 beers, like you feel more headaches than you used to before. There's things that are dead in the head, and it will never come back. But the best thing to do is that you have to forget about it, try to forget about it, and go day by day.
When Tardif returned to the ice in 1976-77, he suffered from dizzy spells and migraines and struggled to regain his old form. He was limited to just 62 games, but scored 49 goals and helped the Nordiques to their first and only Avco Cup championship in a 7-game final series with the Winnipeg Jets.
Derrière à Réal Cloutier qui manœuvre bien la passe. Oh, ça c'était bien fait. Revoyons le jeu.
Donc, c'est une mise au jeu très importante rapportée par les Nordiques. Donc, on voit Réal qui localise du coin de l'œil Marc Tardif.
Je vais vous présenter le capitaine des Nordiques de Québec, Marc Tardif.
With the WHA condensed to just 8 teams in 77-78, Marc once again led the league in goals with 65, assists with 89, and points with 154 to set the all-time Major League point scoring mark previously held by Phil Esposito. He played another season in the WHA before Quebec merged with the NHL. A splendid skater who excelled at stick handling in close, Marc finished his WHA career with a whopping 666 points in only 446 regular season WHA games. The 2-time league MVP and 4-time All Star forever ranks as the WHA's all-time goal-scoring king. Upon his return to the NHL in 1979, Tardif was a bit past his prime, but still a force for the expansion club. In fact, he was on pace for a 45-goal season in 79-80 until he got injured. Still, he finished with 68 points in 58 games that he played that season. When the 1980-81 season began, it was clear that Marc would play second fiddle behind the Stanley brothers, who had just defected from Slovakia, and young winger Michel Goulet. Marc wasn't too happy about the situation, but continued to produce. He even scored 39 goals during the 81-82 season for his best NHL performance, and he earned a trip to the 1982 NHL All Star game. Marc Tardif played his final NHL season in 1982-83, languishing as a third-line left wing behind Michel Goulet and Anton Stastny. Tensions had grown between him and head coach Michel Bergeron, who bristled at Tardif's now indifferent attitude and half-hearted defensive play. But all was forgotten the next season, however, when Tardif's number 8 was hoisted to the rafters of Le Colisée, the second number the franchise retired after J.C. Tremblay's number 3. Later, he was inducted into the Quebec Sports Hall of Fame. Marc's timing in the NHL was maybe a little bit off, and it may have cost him the Hockey Hall of Fame status he deserves. Tardif broke in with a powerful Montreal team and never got a chance to play on a top line. And he was 30 years old when he returned to the NHL and got stuck behind Goulet and Stastny. But he finished his career with 2 Stanley Cup titles, 1 Avco Cup trophy, and 1 Memorial Cup. And he was perhaps the WHA's all-time greatest player. Marc finished his NHL career with a respectable 401 points in 517 regular season games. In retirement, Tardif owns successful Toyota and Kia dealerships in Quebec. He devotes much of his time to his family, his children and grandchildren. In 2007, over 30 years after the horrifying attack he endured against the Calgary Cowboys, one of these car dealerships would be the scene of an unexpected and dramatic meeting between Tardif and Rick Giadzio. Giadzio, passing through Quebec for one of his son's Pee-wee tournaments, asked the local reporter if he could arrange a brief meeting between himself and Tardif. A stunned Tardif agreed to the meeting. When Giadzio, accompanied by his 2 sons, entered the room, the air crackled with tension. A crowd of onlookers nervously circled the aging warriors. For the first time since 1976, Tardif faced the man who could have ruined his life. Giadzio knew what his host was thinking in those emotional moments. He said, "I would like to apologize for what I did to you 31 years ago." He then gave him a hug and said, I'm glad you agreed to meet me." It was an emotional moment for Tardif, who struggled to hold back tears. Said Tardif, "I did not expect to experience such a meeting today. It is impossible for me to express what I feel. It's a weird feeling. I sometimes thought that one of these days I would meet him somewhere. He showed a lot of courage by coming to meet me. I don't know if I would have been able to do the same." The passage of time can soften bad memories, but never completely erase them. But in their elder years, Marc Tardif and Rick Jodzier remind us that even the most bitter rivals can reach a peaceful resolution to the battles of long ago. The Pro Hockey Alumni celebrates the players who made the game great. If you like this documentary of Marc Tardif, check out this video for more amazing stories from hockey's golden era.